Welcome back, and in this episode we're going to be talking about cold brew. What cold brew is, how to make it, and most importantly the pros and cons. Cold brew is just coffee brewed cold using room temperature or cold water. And aside from its brewing temperature, the other main difference is that it is made through immersion. So the two fundamental differences are room temperature / cold water and immersion brewing. You honestly probably don't even need a scale to make cold brew, but because I have a scale, I might as well just use it. My personal recipe for cold brew is a 1:10 ratio of coffee to water. So I'm gonna start off by turning on my scale and measuring some coffee out. So again, this is not sponsored, but we'll be featuring beans from Nguyen Coffee Supply. First time for me to have coffee from Vietnam. I was pretty curious about this particular brand of coffee because one, I never had coffee from Vietnam, didn't even know that they grew coffee, and it really is similar to my goals in terms of Philippine coffee. So shout out to Nguyen Coffee Supply. Medium roast Arabica and Robusta beans, which I will make a video about another time. So let's start going into the pros of making cold brew. Pro number one, no fuss. If you watched the previous video on how to make Japanese iced coffee, you need a lot of stuff. You need a scale, you need this dope kettle, you need a dripper. But with cold brew, you just literally add coffee to a container and let it sit for X amount of time. Pro number two is that cold brew is actually less acidic than normal coffee. So if you are trying to watch the enamel on your teeth, your dentist has been scolding you because you are consuming too much acids, well, cold brew might be a good choice. But then again, Japanese iced filter coffee has less acidity as well, so yeah, pick your poison. So 40 grams, we're gonna need 400 milliliters of water, or 400 grams. Another pro is that cold brew lasts a long time. So the great thing about it is that you can make it in bulk, refrigerate it for maybe, let's say, a week, and you'll be good to go. If you want something quick, easy that you can grab outside the fridge. So once you have all your water in, I kind of just like to swirl it to make sure all the grounds are soaked and immersed. And that's pretty much it. This is how you make cold brew. I'm gonna let this cold brew steep for about 10 to 12 hours depending on how I find the flavor. At this point, it's all kind of just personal calibration to your taste on whether you find it under extracted or over extracted. One final pro that I can think of is that cold brew does not oxidize as quickly as regular coffee. And what does oxidation mean? Well, oxidation just means exposure of all these solubles found in ground coffee to air. It's time for the cons. One of the biggest cons I can think of is that making cold brew, you kind of need to plan for it. Because the extraction takes 10 to 12 hours, you do need to consider when you're gonna make it and then when you're gonna filter out the coffee. Another con is that I just personally think the flavor of hot coffee is better, which is why I have leaned towards making Japanese iced filter coffee. With Japanese filter coffee, you get a much wider range of flavor than if you were to brew it cold, and that's mainly because of the science of hot water. Science says that a lot of solubles are solubilized with hot water, which is why you can get much more flavor out of it in less time. Whereas with cold brew, you need to do two things to compensate for it. Either grind your coffee a lot finer to extract more flavor out of it, or immerse it for a longer amount of time. But with hot coffee, you do extract more acidity found in hot coffee, as well as making your coffee more prone to being oxidized. Brewing with hot water does tend to bring out more of the acidity found in coffee. Cold brew does tend to be sweeter. Cold brew might be more of your choice. But going back, one final thing I want to say is that because you do tend to find cold brew sweeter, and you do get a much more narrow flavor profile compared to if you were to brew it hot, I personally think that medium roasts are much more preferred over light roasts when making cold brew. A lot more chocolatey, nutty, and caramelly toffee notes are much more prominently found in cold brew. And I personally seldom get those floral, berry, nuanced notes of African coffee, especially if it's lighter roasted too. When you're making cold brew, go for medium roasts. But yeah, that's it for this episode. And these were the pros and cons of making cold brew. So just to wrap it all up, cold brew is essentially ground coffee immersed in room temp or cold water, soaked for a long period of time. Gives you a much rounder flavor with less acidity and some more sweetness too. The steps are as easy as getting ground coffee, putting it in a container, adding water, waiting, and then filtering it out. So if you've been intimidated to make cold brew at home, don't, because it's literally as easy as that. Who knows, it may also end up being one of your favorite methods of enjoying coffee. And also, if you have any other questions about the science of cold brew, more than happy to dive into it, because I'm just a dude that likes coffee.